So while you have certain people like Melanie Jolie, uh, Doug Ford, Justin Trudeau, and in this case Jagmeet Singh, all retaliating on this Trump tariff war, trying to up the ante like some sort of drunken poker night by imposing their own tariff wars on the United States and just absolutely demising the even just the notion of what that will do with Canadian workers. Just show the utter lunacy of this battle, just to show the utter pathetic stupidity that all it takes is for politicians to sit down and talk with these people. So Jagmeet Singh, just to remind people, he says he wants to shut off critical minerals to the United States to counter Trump. Obviously, Melanie Jolie, the foreign affairs minister, is saying that everything's on the table, including shutting off energy reserves, which is just absolutely devastating, not only impacting the United States by cutting off the energy, but also the Canadian economy is going to be impacted. That's our biggest, exports when it comes to Alberta. And also those pipelines go through a lot of individual provinces, so it's going to affect our people as well. It's going to affect other provinces in their needs of natural gas and oil reserves in the making of this. So Jagmeet Singh says he's going to stand up to bullies in this process. Well, who also chimed into this is Tamara Lich, who is very familiar with dealing with bullies, who's very familiar with dealing with authoritarian thugs that just want to push you around. She stated, some Canadians stood up to bullies once, and you called them all violent white supremacists and hurled baseless and false allegations against them. You have stood up for nothing in your tenure except yourself. I mean, the most he's ever fought for was to keep his pensions. That is why him and Trudeau made this coalition, got together to make this political force to go after the Conservatives, and then fight to move the election day further ahead so that their politicians, whether remaining in office or not, will continue to get a pension. They'll be signed up to get a full pension, while Canadians are struggling to work paycheck to paycheck to pay for necessities. So, yeah. So Tamara Lich knows how to stand up to bullies, whereas Jagmeet Singh likes to do theatrics. That's what that is entailing. But luckily, there are some rational people on the behest of Canadian politicians that are willing to actually reason out. Like Danielle Smith, for example. So the Premier of Alberta says, over the last 24 hours, I had the opportunity to meet with President Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago last night and his golf club this morning. We had a friendly and constructive conversation during which I emphasized the mutual importance of the United States-Canadian energy relationship, and specifically how hundreds of thousands of American jobs are supported by energy exports from Alberta. I was also able to have similar discussions with several key allies of the incoming administration and was encouraged to hear their support for a strong energy security with Canada. On the behalf of Albertans, will continue to engage in constructive dialogue and diplomacy with the incoming administration and elected federal and state officials from both parties. I will do all that I can to further Alberta and Canadians' interest. The United States and Canada are both proud and independent nations with one of the most important security alliances on Earth and the largest economic partnership in history. We need to preserve our independence while we grow this critical partnership for the benefit of Canadians and Americans for generations to come. Considering the fact that the Liberal Party and Jagmeet Singh and so many individuals have set the bar so low, this sounds like the most effective leadership role. This sounds like an actual leader that's willing to go down and discuss diplomatically. Like, it almost seems like this is how a prime minister should be talking. This is how people should be engaging this conversation. That Danielle Smith, out of all people, has to be the forefront, has to be kind of this interim mediator in this battle to actually sit down and negotiate with Donald Trump. And and in respect, Danielle Smith is known to having these battles, known to having to negotiate with even her own province with the restrictions that Justin Trudeau has put upon Alberta and Albertan oil and energy reserves. She is known to having to deal with these negotiations. So having her down at Mar-a-Lago to discuss this with Trump and allies within the Trump administration, this is how you do it, folks. This is how you actually engage a conversation. You sit down, you negotiate, you have this argument laid out to say the importance about the Alberta reserves going down to the United States and the importance of their trade partnership and independent nations and how we can negotiate and actually come to some sort of agreement without going to the needs of tariff battles or imposing that Canada becomes the 51st state. There are ways we can actually do this. So here she is at her Mar-a-Lago hotel room, and she's taking questions from the media. She states that there's been plenty of talk about federal politicians banning Alberta's energy exports. So let me address that as clearly as I can. And she's going to address this to, I believe this is the CBC talking. I'm not totally sure. But here she is in her hotel room, sounding the most rational out of all the politicians I've seen in discussion with this. Listen.
A little bit earlier that if there is some sort of export ban, you'd hinted a little bit earlier that if there is some sort of export ban on Alberta oil, that would precipitate a national unity crisis. From your perspective as Premier of Alberta, what does that look like other than, I don't know, people being mad in the streets? Or I mean, is it a separation referendum? Like, what are we talking about when you say national unity crisis?
Well, I can't predict what Albertans would do, but as you know, the part of my strategy over the last 2 years has been to say that we can have a constructive relationship with Canada, and I would hope that would continue to be the case. Here's the thing I find irritating about Eastern politicians making that argument. The reason I find it irritating is because we could have had Energy East, which would have expanded our ability to support our friends in Eastern Canada and also been an export market off the East Coast. We could have had Northern Gateway, which would have expanded and supported export markets in a more substantial way off the West Coast. And Eastern politicians advocated against those things. And so we went to work on expanding our access to the United States with additional egress, with twinning, with looping. We did that because the rest of the country wasn't interested in having that conversation. So to now make the argument that that's a point of leverage is going to be very, very irritating, not only to me, but also to my fellow Albertans. If they want to start the conversation by saying, gosh, maybe we should have had Energy East and Northern Gateway. Let's restart that so that we're not so dependent on one customer. I am more than happy to have that conversation, and I hope that's where the conversation goes. But having been so hostile to Alberta's interests and having canceled so many important projects that would have allowed us to have a diversified customer base, it's outrageous to me that they would even propose it.
So, the fact that she is the most rational person in this conversation says a lot. And also says a lot of just the inner fightings within this country. The fact that she, has tried desperately. Because, again, this is not just one premier fighting just for her own province. This is about defending one of the biggest industries in Canada. And the fact that so many other premiers have attacked and demonized Alberta and tried to dismiss their economy and try to put these horrible restrictions and just doubling down on their energy independency and their energy industry just shows that there's just infighting within this country. and the fact that while Doug Ford and while other people in Ottawa are retaliating against Trump in the most mimical, hilarious, kind of childish qualms, here's Danielle Smith, who is used to negotiating with all these other people, who's had to deal with these bullies, who's had to deal with people in Ottawa that have conflated Alberta and have made it worse in regards to economic prosperity. So she says, yeah, I'm used to all of this. That's why I went to Mar-a-Lago and talked with Donald Trump, because at least the United States was willing to open an olive branch to us, and we've been having this trade negotiation for a long while. So the fact that Danielle Smith is used to this and sounding the most confident, sounding the most professional in this, it's amazing. It is amazing that she has been put down to be, the harsh person. She is put down for not going along with the COVID mandates. She was one of the very few premiers to actually go against the restrictions. She was one of the first premiers to go against censorship. She's one of those individuals that goes against the grain against the rest of the Canadian provinces that stand on guard with the oligarchy, if you will, and is willing to actually reach out in importance to this. So that's why this conversation matters so much, regardless of how you feel about Danielle Smith, is the fact that she's not just fighting for Albertans, she's fighting for this country and the economic prosperity within this industry. One of the top industries in the country is Albertan oil and natural gas and the oil sands within that province. And if that's going to be cut off with the United States, then let's have this conversation about implementing it to other provinces. So, hey, maybe we could send that oil to another trading partner, or maybe we nationalize the oil reserves. Who knows? But we're not having any of these conversations. Nobody's willing to actually talk. And that's the embarrassment part of this. So Rachel Parker, who's a journalist for True North, says Premier Danielle Smith says Alberta will forge its own relationship with the United States as Ottawa fails to understand what America wants from Canada. We absolutely will defend our own interests and make our own relationships if we have to. So this is back when Trump first announced kind of these tariff wars against Trudeau, how he put this ultimatum on to say, you got to fix your border, you got to fix your fentanyl crisis, you got to fix the immigration crisis that's happening in your country for the benefit of Canadians, or I'm going to put these tariffs on. And while the rest of Canada was kind of like, oh my God, we got to put our own tariffs on this bastard. This orange game show host needs to be stopped. We got to stop bullies. Danielle Smith goes on to CBC News here, and again, being a rational person, goes on and says, no, we're going to actually defend our interests in a professional way. So listen to what she says to CBC on this.
First on this to ensure that your energy products aren't tariffed, or does the access to your energy become part of the Team Canada conversation about ensuring all sectors of the economy are not subject to any kind of new tariffs?
I would love a Team Canada approach, but look, we're not going to allow for an emissions cap to have any role in reducing our production. And so if the federal government is insistent upon going down that pathway, then we'll take care of our own interests. I would like our interests to align with the federal government. I've told them so. I've told them that dropping the emissions cap is part and parcel of being able to do that. They have been unresponsive so far, but I think they need to recalibrate the relationship with the United States. We know what the United States wants. They want the federal government to meet its 2% NATO commitment, and they want to be able to participate with us in energy security. If those are the two things that we have to bring to the table, then you don't come to the table with an emissions cap. So that's part of the reason why we are going to be as collaborative as we can with the federal government approach. But we absolutely will defend our own interests and make our own relationships if we have to.
So it's just further and further driving Canada apart the more they try to do these just unjust, hilarious. It's laughable. It literally is laughable every time they bring up this tariff war, where as you have Danielle Smith here discussing how this is the importance of energy security. This is the importance of our industry. This is the importance of Alberta. This is the importance of the just general economic stability of Canada, that if we don't have these strong energy sources, we're going to lose this battle. And the more we just retaliate, it's just absolute lunacy. And like I said, she's used to combating these issues. She's had to combat them since Justin Trudeau imposed, was it C69, that they put the emissions cap on production in Alberta. And people like Tamara Lich, who worked in that industry and knows about the logistics, she has spoken highly about this. She knows about obviously the energy infrastructure, but also the retaliations that the Trudeau government has put upon them. And, they're saying on the behest of climate change that we have to put restrictions on one of the most prosperous economic industries in the country, when in result of that, you're putting energy restriction on Alberta, which is going to crumble the economy in Alberta and the economy as a whole in Canada. And you're getting this from a guy who uses 7 motorcades to go around to talk to the general public. 7 motorcades to go out to a public event, or takes a private jet over to Davos. That has nothing to do with climate change, unfortunately. It has to do with the fact that they're putting a stranglehold on Alberta, and Alberta saying, no, we're not going to deal with this. And if you're not willing to have the conversation, if you're not willing to negotiate, then we'll go elsewhere. We'll resort to the United States. They're willing to at least open up to us. So that is what we should be doing. This is what we should be doing. And we should be looking at Danielle Smith as an example. As an example of, here's someone, a premier of a country that knows a thing or two about, obviously, the energy, knows about exporting, because that is the biggest thing of the Alberta economy, is the exports of their energy imports and exports, that we need to sit down like grown-ass rational people and find some sort of diplomatic solution to this. And I think Donald Trump is willing to do that, but unfortunately, we have premiers, we have politicians within this country that are so childlike that they go into these hissy fits and just adding more further damage and more just embarrassment to the whole entire argument that could have easily been prevented. Like, for example, to remind people, Doug Ford, who notoriously went on to American media and say, you better watch your mouth because we're going to go down and we're going to cut off all the energy. We're going to cut off the electricity in the northern states. You deal with that, New York and Michigan. Which, as I stated, is the most stupid way to go with this, because you're not actually doing anything in the cause of these tariff wars. You're just going on a maniac, super villain-like notion. But also, New York, Michigan, all these different states, I'm pretty certain that they have their own energy infrastructure. So cutting off the electricity, that's going to affect what? 0.1% of the public down there? It's literally not going to do anything. Literally not going to do anything. But here, as Government EXE is Corrupted points out, Doug Ford will now try to walk back the statements he made on regulatory tariffs against the United States after Scott Moe, Danielle Smith, Francois Legault, and Andrew Furey came out publicly stating that they're against the idea. So now Doug Ford, feeling like the lonely guy out of the conversation, and now is as kind of the bad guy in this, now he's trying to tuck his tail in, crawl to the corner, and try to forget about this. But obviously Canadians aren't going to forget about this. Obviously people that saw him on CNN and Fox News and all these outlets, they're not forgetting about this. But here's Doug Ford trying to change the subject and flip-flop, exposing his own hypocrisy. Listen to this.
A lot of the figures have come out and said that they don't believe in retaliatory tariffs. They don't want to follow your lead on on potentially blocking energy exports. How much of the meeting will be spent on your part trying to convince these premiers to do what you've already publicly announced?
Well, we had a good conversation last night. There's two things, most critical things that President-elect Trump is looking for is to secure our border. We all agree on that. And making sure we hit our 2% NATO. Let's make no mistake about this. Everyone has their own interest. No matter if it's Ontario manufacturing that will be hurt more than any jurisdiction in the entire country, or Alberta's oil that won't be touched at all, and they have a pretty secure path there. But it will affect our entire country, these tariffs. Make no mistake about it. And I just believe in making sure we use every tool in our toolbox. If I had a choice, I would rather send more energy down to the U.S., sell them more electricity, sell them more of their critical minerals. But in saying that, we have to make sure that we use every tool in our toolbox to protect Ontario and Canadian.
Use every tool in our toolbox. That sounds very, very different to what we heard earlier from Doug Ford, who said, well, I didn't want to have to, but if I do, I'm going to cut off the electricity. I'm going to cut off Americans from exports that we give to them. And now here's Doug Ford, now that he's caught red-handed, now that he's been exposed for what a pathetic patsy this guy is. That's why he's named Dunsford, according to my rhetoric. Now he's trying to tuck his tail in between his knees. He's trying to coward his way out of the conversation by saying, well, we're going to, use every tool in the toolbox. And, I don't want to cut off the energy exports from Alberta and the economy and blah, 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 blah. Like almost taking exactly what Danielle Smith said previously throughout this crisis, throughout the tariff war showdown expose, whatever you like to call it. And now trying to mimic her actions because Danielle Smith seems to be the only premier that's making progress on this. Seems to be the only politician to actually make progress in this situation. Because unlike Doug Ford, unlike Justin Trudeau, unlike Melanie Joly, unlike so many of these other individuals that make an embarrassment of themselves and this country by making these childish retaliations against the tariff war by imposing their own tariffs, just don't see the eye to eye. They don't see the understanding. They don't see why this tariff war even exists. And yet they just want to impose it and make it a personal vindication of Donald Trump personally attacking them. That's why Jagmeet Singh says, oh, I got to stand up to bullies. And yet, here they are being bullies to what they say is an actual bully, which, in all fair respect, and I'm not a Trump supporter fan whatsoever, but I give credit where credit's due. And with Trump's business acumen, I would hope that there's at least a pathway to negotiating because you're talking to Mr. R the deal. And Trump seems to be that person that if you're willing to sit down, have a rational argument, have it all planned out to say why Canada's resources should not be exposed to tariffs, why we need our sovereignty, why Canada independence is important to the United States, why exactly we need this partnership strengthened, not weakened and just taken over by hegemony globalists that just want to deteriorate sovereignty and borders anyway. That's all this is. If Trump, annexes Canada and becomes the 51st state, you're playing right into the hands of people like George Soros. So let's try to prevent that by actually having rational negotiations, having an argument, talking directly to Donald Trump instead of doing these pathetic fights that are just so stupid. Let's actually talk like a grown-ass adult like we saw with Danielle Smith.